My son and his girlfriend lived in my paid-off house for a year rent-free. They repaid my kindness by handing me a brochure for a nursing home and telling me they needed the space. They thought I was a frail old woman they could just discard into a beige room to wait out my final days. They didn't know that a retired teacher always keeps very, very good records. And they were about to learn their first and final lesson from me. Before we get into it, thank you for being here tonight. For making this little corner of the internet a community. If you believe that a home is more than just four walls and that a person's worth doesn't diminish with age, then you found your people. It means the world to me when you let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now pour yourself something warm and let me tell you how my own son tried to evict me from my own life. My name is Carol Miller and I am 70 years old. For 42 of those years, I have lived in a small, sturdy bungalow on a quiet tree-lined street in Lakewood, Ohio. This house, with its deep front porch and a backyard garden that has been my pride and joy, is more than just a building. It is the archive of my entire adult life. Every scuff on the hardwood floor is a memory of my son Mark learning to ride his tricycle. Every crack in the plaster is a map of the small, seismic shifts of a family's history. The mortgage on this house was paid off a decade ago, a milestone my late husband Tom and I celebrated with a bottle of cheap champagne on the porch swing he'd hung himself. Since Tom passed 5 years ago, the house has been my partner, a silent, steady companion in my widowhood. My life was a quiet, pleasant rhythm. I was a retired public school teacher and the habits of a lifetime, early mornings, a structured day, a sense of purpose had stayed with me. My days were filled with weeding my tomato plants, volunteering at the local library, and monthly book club meetings with friends I'd had since my 20s. It was a simple life, but it was mine. It was peaceful. And then the phone rang. It was Mark. My son. At 42, Mark was still finding his footing. That's the kind phrase. He was a freelance graphic designer, a job that seemed to involve long periods of waiting for inspiration and short, frantic bursts of work that never quite paid the bills. He had his father's kind heart but none of his practical grit. He was a gentle soul, a dreamer, a boy who had never fully learned how to be a man. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, honey," I said, looking out my kitchen window at a fat, red cardinal perched on the bird feeder. "Just watching the birds." "What's on your mind?" "Well," he said, drawing the word out. "You know, Tiffany and I have been having a tough time with rent. The landlord just raised it again. It's crazy." Tiffany was his girlfriend of 2 years, a woman I had met only a handful of times. She was 35, taught yoga part-time, and seemed to spend the rest of her time taking pictures of herself for the internet. "We were thinking, just for a few months, Mom. Just to get back on our feet and save up a deposit for a new place. We were wondering if maybe we could stay with you." A pang of loneliness, a familiar ache since Tom's passing, answered before my practical mind could. The house was too quiet sometimes. The thought of having my son back under my roof, of hearing his footsteps on the stairs, was a powerful lure. "Of course, Mark," I said, my heart swelling. "This is your home. You're always welcome here." They moved in the following weekend, their belongings filling my spare bedroom and spilling into the hallway. At first it was lovely. I cooked them dinners the way I used to when Mark was a boy. We'd watch television together in the evenings. Felt like a family again. But the illusion began to crack almost immediately, and the cracks all started with Tiffany. Tiffany moved through my house with the critical eye of a home inspector looking for flaws. My comfortable, lived-in furniture was dated. My collection of antique teacups was clutter. My framed family photos were a bit much. She didn't say these things to be cruel. She said them with the breezy, unthinking confidence of a person who believes their taste is the only taste. Her career as a social media influencer, it turned out, required the house to be her personal film set. The first sign of trouble came about a week in. I was walking through the living room to water my ferns when she held up a hand, stopping me in my tracks. "Carol, do you mind?" she said, not looking at me. She was contorting herself into a yoga pose in front of her phone, which was propped up on a stack of my books. "I'm live streaming my morning flow. The light in here is perfect, but I can't have people walking through the shot. It messes with the zen." I stood there, frozen in the middle of my own living room. I was messing with the zen. I mumbled an apology and retreated to the kitchen, feeling a strange, hot flush of embarrassment. Over the next few weeks, this became the norm. The living room was off-limits from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for her yoga streams. The dining room, with its good natural light, was her backdrop for photos of smoothie bowls and sponsored protein bars. I found myself checking with her before entering a room in my own house, careful not to disturb the content creation. Mark was oblivious. Or rather, he chose to be. "She's just trying to build her brand, Mom," he'd say with a shrug when I gently mentioned that it was difficult to feel comfortable. "Just let her do her thing. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. I was subtly being marginalized in my own home. My life, my routines were being pushed to the periphery to make space for their needs. I had opened my door to my son out of love and loneliness. I had invited him home. I didn't realize that his girlfriend had every intention of taking over, of transforming my comfortable, memory-filled bungalow into a sterile, minimalist backdrop for a life that wasn't mine. The few months they needed to save up were just beginning, but I already felt like a guest in the house I owned, a ghost haunting the edges of their much more important lives. The few months that Mark and Tiffany needed to get back on their feet stretched and warped, time becoming a malleable concept that suited their needs. 3 months became 6. 6 months bled into a full year. The pretense of them saving up for their own place vanished, replaced by a comfortable, deeply rooted sense of entitlement. My home was no longer a temporary refuge. It was their permanent, rent-free base of operations. The occupation of my house, which had started with Tiffany's yoga live streams, escalated into a full-scale colonization. My living room, once the heart of my home where I'd hosted decades of book club meetings and holiday gatherings, was now permanently arranged as a yoga studio. My comfortable armchair was pushed into a corner, replaced by a basket of beige yoga mats. The coffee table Tom had built was now home to a collection of crystals and a small, tinkling water fountain that was supposed to be calming but only made me feel like I constantly needed to use the bathroom. The dining room suffered a similar fate. My polished oak table, the site of countless family dinners, was now perpetually covered with Tiffany's influencer paraphernalia, ring lights, tripods, and an array of products from obscure wellness brands that she was trying to get to sponsor her. Meals were no longer eaten at the table. We ate on trays in front of the television, a silent, disconnected trio. I found my world shrinking, my life being compressed into the few spaces they had not yet claimed. I was confined for the most part to my bedroom and the kitchen. I felt like a tenant in a boarding house, tiptoeing around the primary residence, careful not to disturb their important work. My own routines, the small rituals that gave my life structure and comfort, were constantly being disrupted. I couldn't listen to my classical music in the afternoon because it interfered with Tiffany's meditation hour. I couldn't have my friends over for our weekly card game because the living room was in use. The most painful part of this slow-motion eviction was the systematic erasure of my own history, a campaign led by Tiffany under the guise of helping me declutter. It began one Saturday afternoon when I found her in the hallway, taking down the gallery of framed family photos that lined the wall. Pictures of Mark's first steps, of school graduations, of family vacations with Tom. "What are you doing, Tiffany?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She turned, a bright, false smile on her face. "Oh, Carol, I was just giving this space a little refresh. So, it's busy. A clean, minimalist aesthetic is much more calming for the mind. And it looks better on camera." She held up a photo of a 5-year-old Mark with a face full of birthday cake. "We can put these in a nice photo album for you. That way they'll be safe and the walls will be nice and clean." She wasn't asking for permission. She was informing me of a decision she had already made. Before I could protest further, she had taken them all down, leaving behind a series of ghostly, faded rectangles on the wallpaper. The wall was clean, yes, but it was also empty. Stripped of its story. My story. I looked to my son for support, but he just shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "She's got a good eye for design, Mom," he mumbled. "It does look cleaner." His betrayal, his casual dismissal of our own family history, was a small, sharp knife in my heart. He was so desperate to keep the peace with Tiffany, so unwilling to create any conflict, that he would stand by and watch her dismantle my life, piece by piece. The decluttering continued. My collection of antique teacups, gathered over a lifetime, was packed into a box and moved to the basement because they were dust collectors. The Afghan my own mother had crocheted for me was folded away because its vibrant colors clashed with the neutral palette. My house was being stripped of its personality, of my personality, and remade in Tiffany's bland beige image. They paid for nothing. I covered the mortgage, the utilities, the property taxes, the groceries. Mark's freelance work was sporadic at best, and Tiffany's income as an influencer seemed to be entirely theoretical. Yet they always had money for new yoga pants, for expensive organic produce, for her smoothie bowls, for the latest smartphone. They lived a life of subsidized leisure, funded by my pension and the equity in my home. I grew more and more isolated. My friends stopped suggesting we get together at my place. It's just easier if we meet at the cafe, Carol. One of them, a kind woman named Sarah, told me gently. She didn't have to say why. She had seen Tiffany's takeover with her own eyes during a brief, uncomfortable visit. I was living in a state of quiet, simmering resentment. I was angry at Tiffany for her gall, for her breathtaking entitlement. But I was more deeply, profoundly hurt by my son. My Mark. The boy I had raised to be kind and considerate. I saw him being led by this woman, too weak to stand up for his own mother, too comfortable in his free ride to risk upsetting the status quo. He saw my home not as my sanctuary but as his safety net. And he was watching silently as his girlfriend cut away the threads, one by one, leaving me with nothing to hold on to. The house was full, but I had never felt more alone. The final, irrevocable line was crossed on a dreary Tuesday in November. The gray, unforgiving Cleveland sky seemed to be a perfect reflection of my mood. I had spent the past year feeling like a ghost in my own home, a silent observer of my own slow erasure. I thought I had reached the limits of my tolerance, that there were no more frontiers of my life for them to conquer. I was wrong. The target was my den. It was a small room off the kitchen, but it was my sanctuary. It was where Tom had built floor-to-ceiling bookshelves for me, which were now crammed with a lifetime of reading. It was where I kept my sewing machine, my desk, my grading books from 30 years of teaching. It was the one room in the house that was unequivocally, unapologetically mine. It was cluttered and cozy and filled with the things that mattered to me. And Tiffany wanted it. I overheard her talking to Mark in the kitchen one evening, her voice a low, persuasive murmur. "It's the perfect space, Marky," she was saying. "The acoustics are great. I could set up my podcasting equipment in there. And it would be a dedicated space for my guided meditation recordings. My brand needs to expand beyond just yoga. I need a real studio." "But Mom uses that room," Mark replied, his voice weak, already half conquered. "She uses it to hoard old books," Tiffany scoffed. "It's a waste of space. We need it. If we're going to build our future, we need the space to do it." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. I knew what was coming. For the next few days, the air in the house was thick with a strange manufactured kindness. Tiffany made me tea. Mark asked about my day. It was the gentle, placating behavior of people who are preparing to deliver a blow. The confrontation, when it came, was staged in my own kitchen. They sat me down at the kitchen table, the two of them on one side, me on the other. It felt like a parent-teacher conference where I was the failing student. Tiffany began, her face arranged in a mask of deep, rehearsed concern. "Carol," she said, her voice soft and syrupy. "Mark and I have been talking. And we're worried about you." I stared at her, my face a blank mask. "Worried about me? Why?" "Well," she continued, reaching across the table to pat my hand. I flinched at her touch. "This is a big house for one person to manage. Must be so much work for you. And we've been thinking, maybe it's time for you to start a wonderful new chapter in your life. A chapter where you can just relax and have fun and be taken care of." She slid a glossy trifold brochure across the table towards me. The cover showed a group of smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard on a pristine lawn. The name on the front was printed in a cheerful, flowing script, Golden Meadows Assisted Living. I looked at the brochure, then up at Tiffany's smiling, predatory face. I felt a roaring in my ears. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking gall, was almost too much to comprehend. She wanted to put me away. To pack me up and ship me out of my own home like a piece of outdated furniture so she could have a podcasting studio. I turned my eyes to my son, my Mark. He was staring down at the table, unable to meet my gaze. His silence was his consent. He was a co-conspirator in his own mother's disposal. "Mark," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What is this?" He finally looked up, his eyes full of a miserable, cowardly guilt. "Mom," he mumbled, his voice low. Tiffany is right. It's a great place. They have activities, bingo nights, people your own age. You'd have fun. I have a home, Mark, I said, my voice gaining a dangerous, steely edge. I have this home. I know, Mom, but... He faltered, looking to Tiffany for his script. She jumped in smoothly. But think of the freedom, Carol. No more cooking, no more cleaning. Just fun. I ignored her, my eyes locked on my son. Tell me the real reason, Mark. He squirmed, his face turning a blotchy red. He looked at Tiffany, who gave him a small, sharp nod. He took a deep breath and delivered the line that would sever the last, final thread of maternal love in my heart. Mom, he said, his voice pleading, pathetic. We just need the space. We can't grow, we can't build our future crammed in here like this. Think of it as you helping us finally get our lives on track. There was the truth in all its ugly, selfish glory. My life, my home, my comfort were obstacles. I was an inconvenience standing in the way of their future. A future they intended to build within the walls of the home I had paid for with a lifetime of hard work. They weren't asking me. They were telling me. My chapter was over. It was time for theirs to begin. In that moment, something inside me broke. The deep, aching hurt that had been my constant companion for the past year was cauterized by a sudden, white-hot fury. The grief I felt for the son I had lost was replaced by a cold, crystalline resolve. They saw me as a frail, helpless old woman, someone who could be gently pushed aside, whose life could be neatly packed into a single room in a facility named after a meadow. They had made a terrible, terrible miscalculation. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had mistaken my patience for senility. They thought they were closing the book on my life. They had no idea that I was about to write a whole new chapter for them. And it was not going to have a happy ending. A profound, chilling silence descended upon the kitchen. Mark and Tiffany looked at me expectantly, waiting for tears, for protests, for the emotional breakdown of a defeated old woman. I gave them none of it. The part of me that was capable of those things had withered and died the moment my son told me he needed my space more than he needed his mother in her own home. I looked down at the glossy brochure for Golden Meadows, at the smiling, vacant faces of the stock photo seniors. I picked it up, my hand surprisingly steady. I studied it for a long moment, then raised my eyes to meet theirs. I let them see the tears welling, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, calculated performance. Well, I said, my voice a masterpiece of wounded resignation, a fragile, trembling whisper. If this is what you both think is best. If this is what will help you. I let my voice trail off, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down my cheek. The relief on their faces was immediate and palpable. It was disgusting. Tiffany's concerned frown morphed into a barely concealed, triumphant smile. Mark let out a long, shaky breath, the guilt already beginning to recede, replaced by the selfish comfort of having gotten his way. Oh, Mom, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. It's for the best. For everyone. I don't know, I said, pulling my hand away and wiping my eyes. It's all so confusing. All the paperwork, the finances. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I've never been good with that sort of thing. Your father always handled it. I was laying the first stone in my trap, painting myself as the very picture of helpless, befuddled fragility they already believed me to be. Tiffany seized the opportunity, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Don't you worry about a thing, Carol. We'll help you with everything. We'll go through it all with you step by step. We'll make it easy. Would you? I asked, looking up at them with wide, trusting eyes. That would be such a help. I'll need to get all my papers in order. Bank statements, pension information, all of that. Maybe you should be my power of attorney, Mark. Just to help me manage things once I'm in the home. Mark puffed up his chest slightly, a flicker of pride in his eyes. Power of attorney. It sounded so official, so grown up. Of course, Mom. Whatever you need. They thought they were taking control. They had no idea they were handing me the keys to their own destruction. The next few weeks were a surreal performance. I played the part of the sad, confused woman to perfection. I would forget where I put my bank statements. I would ask Tiffany to read the fine print on the Golden Meadows application because my eyes weren't what they used to be. I would sigh and talk about how difficult it was to be old. They lapped it up, their condescension a thick, suffocating blanket. Under the guise of getting my affairs in order, I systematically gathered every piece of information I needed. With Mark's help, I compiled a complete dossier on his financial life. His social security number, his bank account details, his sporadic freelance income, his student loan debt that he had never managed to pay off. He handed it all over willingly, believing he was helping his poor, confused mother prepare for the nursing home. He was, in fact, handing me the ammunition I would need to ruin him. While my public performance was one of helplessness, my private life was a whirlwind of focused, methodical activity. My first call was to Sarah, my old friend from book club. Sarah wasn't just a reader. She was a retired lawyer, and her mind was as sharp as a tack at 72. I met her at our favorite cafe, a place far from the prying eyes of my housemates. I laid out the entire sordid story, my voice not trembling with sadness, but cold and steady with rage. Sarah listened, her expression growing harder and more furious with every word. When I finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She offered a plan. "The ungrateful little parasites," she hissed, her teacup rattling in its saucer. "Carol, what they're doing is a classic case of elder abuse, emotional and financial. But a lawsuit would be messy and long. We can do better. We can be faster. We can be more creative." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Creative is what I had in mind. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and I became a two-woman war room. We met in secret at her house, poring over my financial documents and the information I had gleaned from Mark. Sarah's legal mind, combined with my intimate knowledge of my son's weaknesses, made for a potent combination. We drafted documents. We made phone calls. We laid out a strategy that was precise, legal, and utterly devastating. It was a strategy built on a simple premise: to use their own greed and entitlement as the fuel for their own downfall. They wanted my house. They wanted my money. Fine. I would give them just enough rope, and I would trust with every fiber of my being that they would use it to hang themselves. Back at home, I continued my charade. I let them tour Golden Meadows with me, a place so sterile and smelling so strongly of bleach and despair that it made my heart ache for the poor souls who had to live there. I nodded along sadly as the director showed me the tiny beige room that would be mine. "It's nice," I said to Tiffany on the way home, my voice hollow. "It's perfect, Carol," she said, squeezing my arm. "A fresh start." I looked out the car window at the familiar streets of my neighborhood, at the houses with their gardens and their histories. A fresh start. They had no idea what a fresh start I was planning for them. They thought they were closing a chapter. But in my secret war room with my brilliant, ruthless lawyer friend, I was preparing to drop a bomb right in the middle of their story. The centerpiece of the trap Sarah and I designed was beautiful in its simplicity. It was built on the foundation of their own greed, baited with the one thing they couldn't resist: the illusion of free money. A week after the visit to Golden Meadows, I sat Mark and Tiffany down at the kitchen table again. This time my performance was one of dawning, trusting acceptance. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," I began, my voice soft and steady. "And you're right. It will be easier for me at the new place. And it will be easier for you to help me if our finances are connected." I saw a flicker of avarice in Tiffany's eyes. Mark just looked relieved that I wasn't fighting anymore. "I called the bank," I continued, lying smoothly. "And I think the best thing to do is to add you to my accounts, Mark. My checking account and my main credit card. That way you can pay my bills from the home and, handle any expenses that come up. It will just be simpler for everyone." It was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment they believed they were gaining full control. The last obstacle, my financial independence, was seemingly being handed over to them on a silver platter. "Mom, that's a great idea," Mark said, his voice full of false sincerity. "That makes perfect sense. We'll take care of everything for you. You won't have to worry about a thing." "I know you will, dear," I said, patting his hand. The next day the three of us went to the bank. I put on a good show, asking the bank teller a series of confused questions, allowing Mark to explain everything to me. He signed the paperwork to be added as a joint owner on my checking account and an authorized user on my credit card. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, gave me a slightly concerned look, but I just smiled back, a picture of grandmotherly trust. The trap was set. I knew my son. Mark was weak and lazy, but he wasn't malicious with money. He wouldn't go on a wild spending spree. But Tiffany I was counting on. And she did not disappoint. The credit card, which I had only ever used for groceries and the occasional online purchase, became her personal magic wand. The spending started small. A new high-end yoga mat. A set of expensive organic cotton towels. Things she could justify as household needs. "The old towels were so scratchy, Carol," she'd say with a bright smile. "We need nice things for when we have guests." But her confidence grew quickly. Within a week, the charges began to escalate. A top-of-the-line blender for her smoothies appeared on the kitchen counter. A minimalist Scandinavian-style armchair was delivered to the living room, replacing my comfortable chintz wingback. "The old one was just so dated," she explained, not even bothering to ask. She was redecorating the house, my house, for her future life in it, and she was doing it on my dime. Every time a package arrived, every time a new piece of furniture appeared, I would just smile my sad, vacant smile. Inside I was cheering. Every swipe of that card was another nail in her coffin. Sarah and I had a system. I paid the credit card bill online every few days from my checking account, ensuring the available balance remained high. I didn't want the bank to flag the unusual activity. I wanted to give them as much room as they needed. And every single day I would log into the credit card account, take a screenshot of the itemized charges and email it to Sarah. We were building a case, a meticulous, undeniable record of their profligacy. The spending became brazen. There were charges from expensive clothing boutiques, from a high-end spa, for a weekend getaway to a wellness retreat in the countryside. They were living the life they believed they deserved, the life of the rightful owners of my home, and they were doing it with a giddy, reckless abandon. One evening, I came home from my library volunteering to find Mark assembling a massive, wall-mounted television in the living room. The box it came in was bigger than my kitchen table. "What's this, Mark?" I asked, my voice full of gentle curiosity. "Oh, hey, Mom," he said, not looking up from his work. "Tiffany thought we needed an upgrade. The old one was ancient. This one is a smart TV. It's better for her brand." The television cost over $2,000. I just nodded slowly. "That's nice, dear." They were so blinded by their own greed, so convinced of my senility and their own cleverness, that they couldn't see the snare tightening around them. They weren't inheriting a house. They were gleefully racking up tens of thousands of dollars of debt. Debt that was legally and exclusively in Mark's name, as he was the authorized user, not a joint owner on the credit card account. A crucial distinction Sarah had pointed out. Debt that I, as the primary account holder, had no legal obligation to pay back if I could prove it was fraudulent or unauthorized for my use. Debt that they, with their non-existent savings and sporadic income, would have absolutely no way of repaying. The move-out date was set for the 1st of the month. As it approached, their excitement was palpable. They started talking about what they would do with my bedroom after I was gone, how they would convert my beloved den into a podcasting studio. They discussed it all right in front of me as if I were already a ghost. I just listened and I smiled. My heart was a cold, hard stone in my chest. There was no more pain, no more sadness. There was only the quiet, patient satisfaction of a plan coming together perfectly. They were celebrating their victory. They had no idea they were dancing on the edge of a cliff. And I was the one who was about to give them the final gentle push. The last day of the month arrived, a crisp, clear Friday in early autumn. The air was full of the scent of burning leaves and the promise of change. For Mark and Tiffany, it was the eve of their new life, the final day they would have to put up with me. For me, it was graduation day. They were in a celebratory mood, buzzing with a barely contained energy. Tiffany was on her phone, showing Mark pictures of the minimalist Japanese-inspired bedroom furniture she planned to order for their master suite, my bedroom, as soon as I was gone. "It's going to be so serene, Marky," she was saying. "A total sanctuary." I spent the afternoon packing a small overnight bag. I packed my toiletries, a change of clothes, and the thick file folder Sarah and I had compiled, which now contained a mountain of evidence. "Are you all packed, Mom?" Mark asked, seeing my bag by the door. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt perhaps, but it was quickly extinguished by the stronger flame of his own self-interest. "Almost, dear," I said, giving him a sad, watery smile. "The movers for the rest of my things are coming from Golden Meadows tomorrow morning," they said. This was a lie, of course. There were no movers. That evening, I told them I was going to spend my last night at Sarah's house. "It's just too emotional for me being here tonight," I explained, my voice thick with feigned sorrow. Too many memories. Of course, Carol, Tiffany said, her sympathy as thin as onion skin. You do what you need to do. We'll see you tomorrow to help you get settled in at the new place. You're both so good to me, I whispered. I gave my son a final lingering look, memorizing the face of the stranger he had become. Then I walked out the front door of my house for the last time as a victim. I spent the evening at Sarah's, but we weren't drinking tea and reminiscing. We were making final preparations. We printed the documents. We sealed the envelopes. We went over the plan one last time. It was the eve of battle and we were ready. The next morning, back at my bungalow, Mark and Tiffany woke up not to the sound of a moving truck, but to a sharp, official rap on the front door. It was a process server, a grim-faced man in a suit, who handed a thick envelope to a confused, pajama-clad Mark. I like to picture the scene. I imagine them opening the envelope at my kitchen table, expecting some final piece of paperwork from the nursing home. Instead, the first document they would have seen was a formal, legally binding eviction notice. It was drafted by Sarah's law firm and signed by me, the sole owner of the property. It gave them, Mark Miller and Tiffany Bell, 30 days to vacate the premises. Their shock would have been profound. But it was the documents tucked behind the eviction notice that would have truly destroyed them. The second document was a formal demand for immediate repayment of debt. It was addressed to Mark Miller. Attached to it was a meticulously itemized 20-page printout of the credit card statements from the past month. Every yoga mat, every spa day, every piece of furniture, every smoothie ingredient was there in black and white, highlighted and cataloged. The grand total was a staggering $27,432.18. The letter, written in cold, unforgiving legalese, explained that as the authorized user, Mark was solely responsible for the debt he and his partner had incurred. It stated that I, the primary account holder, considered these charges to be fraudulent and unauthorized for my personal use, and that if the full amount was not repaid to me within 30 days, I would be pursuing legal action against him for the recovery of the funds, and would also be reporting the fraudulent activity to the credit card company, a move that would decimate his credit for years to come. They were trapped. Utterly and completely. They had no money. They had no savings. The beautiful, minimalist furniture they had bought to fill my house now represented a mountain of debt they had no possible way of climbing. The house they thought was theirs was being taken away. The woman they thought was a frail, helpless pushover had just checkmated them with a quiet, devastating precision. Their frantic, hysterical phone calls started about 10 minutes later. I didn't answer. I let them go to voicemail, a series of increasingly desperate messages filled with disbelief, then rage, then pathetic, pleading sobs. I returned to my house the next day. They were already gone, having packed their few original belongings in a panic and fled. They had left behind all the new furniture, the television, the blender, the expensive monuments to their own greed. I hired a consignment company to come and haul it all away. The proceeds from the sale paid for a brand new state-of-the-art security system and a very nice vacation for me and Sarah. The first thing I did after changing the locks was walk through my home. My home. The silence was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. I unpacked the box of family photos and hung them back on the wall, one by one. I placed my mother's Afghan back on the sofa. I put my teacups back in their rightful place. I was reclaiming my territory, restoring my story. I never heard from Mark again, except through a letter from a debt consolidation agency a few months later. I don't know where he and Tiffany ended up. I don't care. I sit now on my porch swing, the one Tom hung in the quiet of a Lakewood evening. My garden is thriving. My house is my own. I learned a hard lesson about the cruelty that can hide behind a familiar face. But I also learned that I am not a frail, helpless old woman. I am a teacher. And I gave my son and his girlfriend one final, unforgettable lesson. A lesson in consequences. And the tuition cost them everything.